Hi and welcome, my name is Lawrence Baker and this video is going to be about the apply image command in Photoshop. Now apply image differs from calculations, though they look very similar. Calculations works on channels only. It takes two channels, blends them together to make a third channel. Apply image, as it sounds, you have to pick something first, then apply either a blend mode, etc., to that sort of target, layer, or layer mask or channel. So you can work on layer mask, the layer thumbnail, the actual image, or on the channels with apply image. But mainly apply image is used for a technique called frequency separation. I call it high frequency separation because what you're doing is you're taking a portrait, separating out the high frequency detail. High frequency means pores and the texture of the skin. That's what high frequency means in photography. Low frequency will be the shape of the nose. The texture on the nose would be high frequency. So frequency separation or high frequency separation, whatever, it's done using apply image. And it is controversial. A lot of people say it's over the top, but it is a quick and dirty method of softening skin quickly. And I'm going to use apply image. So let's get going. We need two more duplicates of this background layer. Command or Control, Alt or Option J. The Alt option will allow me to name it. If I just use Control or Command J, I duplicate. With the Alt Option key pressed, I can give it a name. This one is going to be called Blur. Command and Control, Alt Option J. And this one's going to be called Texture. I'm not going to blur that layer. I will in a minute with Gaussian blur. I want to show you how apply image works basically. So let's go up to apply image. I'm on the texture layer. You're going to apply something to this texture layer. Right. Image, apply image. The source is the file name. You can use a different file outside of this open image here. If you had another image open with the same pixel dimensions, it would be available to you in this pull down. So it doesn't always have to be the same image. So this is the source, that's the layer. Be careful what you pick because this will always default to merged and that's all the layers put together. What we're looking for is a blur layer. So when we come to blur that layer, this is really important. You've got to be very careful, keep your eyes open because it'll always default back to merged. So the layer is blur, this is the source. The channel is RGB, the composite channel. I can pick another color channel. Don't forget these will be grayscale or the transparency of the layer or another alpha channel if I had it there. I can also use a selection and I will show you that later. So multiply, I'm using this as a source. What I've clicked on is that texture layer. That's my target. Now you can't see much there because the name of the layer is buried away in the file name. But it's what I've ticked on. So I'm applying the source using a blend mode and a channel, etc., to this texture layer. Now these images are exactly the same, but with multiply, it will always make things darker. So, except it won't blow out the blacks either, though. It'll always make things darker. With screen, it will always make things lighter. With overlay and soft light, which are contrast modes, overlay is much stronger. Overlay will make it very punchy, very contrasty. Soft light, less so. So I've added quite a lot of contrast to that image already. If I take the preview off, you can see what I've done. But with apply image for this high frequency separation, we use add and subtract. And it makes life simpler for explaining how apply image works because add and subtract are very simple mathematical terms and it is that straightforward. So let's go down to add or subtract. I'm going to pick subtract first. So because these layers are exactly the same, with subtract and 2 and 128, I'm not going to see much going on at the moment because basically I need to make sure I picked the right layer. I have picked blur. I've got it on subtract and 2 and 128. I'm just doing my run through here because it's easy to make a mistake. Now, obviously, I haven't ticked preview either. Now this, because I turned it off, this is really a difficult tool to use because it it needs a lot of checking before you go ahead. And you think you're doing it wrong, all you've got to do is stop and make sure you got the right layer picked, you got preview on, etc. And you are clicked on the target layer you want to work on. So I didn't have preview on, I was thrown for a second. Preview on. Now you can see I've got 50% grey. Well, it is 50% grey. And the way subtract works, or add, they're very simple. Well, but subtract works like this. You have your target layer with the source layer and the channel, whatever. Just think source and target. You're subtracting away the pixel values from the target layer using the source layer. Now, as these two images are exactly the same in the layers, let's say in the red channel it was 200 on, in the target, and it was 200 in the source. 200 minus, because that's what subtract is, minus 200 equals 0. So 0 to 255, 0 is black. I've got black on the screen. Well, I haven't because I've got an offset on. So I put it to 0, I've got black. I'll come to offset and scale in a minute. So offset and scale are only available when you're using add and subtract. So it's very straightforward. There is a method different for 16-bit images against 8-bit images. Personally, I've never seen it behave any differently. The result always looks the same whether I use subtract or add, but I will come to that more in a minute. I don't want to digress too much. So with subtract and a scale of 2, it doesn't matter if it's 1, I've got black on screen because basically, it works channel to channel, but then, pixel value of 200 minus 200, because same image, I've got 0, I've got black. A scale will always make things darker. Well, I can't go darker than black. That's why I'm seeing nothing. It is making a difference, but I can't see it because I'm already at black. This is the thing about apply image. These numbers are really important because they're stored. Let's say I had blurred that layer and I've got this number come out from the subtraction for, a luminosity level of 200. That gets past the scale. It then gets divided by the scale. So let's say 200 divided by 1 is 200. So scale won't do anything. It only runs between 1 and 2. So if I put 3 in and tab, I get a warning saying a number between 1 and 2 is required. Closest value inserted. So it's going to put 2 in there. So normally on 1, nothing happens. You can have, decimal places, 3 decimal places. You can have 1.578 if you wanted to. But basically, scale will make things darker, but it will soften off the transitions as well. That's what you're seeing visually. All that's happening is it's dividing the number that comes from the subtract or add, dividing it by the number here between 1 and 2. 1 will have no effect, 2 will have the maximum effect. Always make it darker, will soften off the transitions. Offset, all the result of all this, then the scale dividing by the scale, that gets passed to offset. Then you have the decision to make whether to make it brighter or darker. 255 will make it very bright, minus 255 will make it black. So it goes beyond 0. And this is important because you can go, as I say, you could have a number like 300 there, and that would be very white, obviously, but you'll only see white, but that number is stored there. It's really important because it gets past the scale and then we use offset to bring it back to what I call a normal range. Now, if I put 1 to 8 in, which is the luminosity level for 50% grey, I've got 50% grey because I had black. So scale is having no impact here, but it does have an impact. I will show you that in a minute. But offset, I brought it to grey. Now, this is what we would use if we blurred that blur layer. We'd use that blur layer, use subtract, 2 and 128 for an 8-bit image, which this is. It's a JPEG, always 8-bit. And then you would just start using linear light blend mode and, doing your normal work for softening out the skin. But let's do it properly now. Let's cancel. Let's untick texture, go to blur, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Pick a ridiculous amount because I want to overdo it. But what I'm trying to do is lose the texture in the skin. This video is not about portrait retouching as such. It's just explaining the most common use of apply image, which happens to be using add and subtract, which makes life really easy when you're explaining how an apply image actually works. So I've done that. I've blurred it all off. I might blur it off a little bit more, go over the top a little bit, just for demonstration purposes. I go back to the texture layer. I tick it on. So I'm applying the blur layer to the texture layer now. You better make sure you've got it ticked so you can see it. Go to Image, Apply Image. It'll always go to different ones like Merge and Multiply. You've got to be really careful here. Subtract. That word merged is there. You've got to put it on blur. Make sure you don't make the mistake that most people make, including myself. 2 and 128. That's the normal settings. I've got mainly a grayscale image, a little bit of color there. But basically, it's taken away the high frequency that sort of is subtracted out the texture. If I put that scale down to 1, which is no effect taking place, it will have a very pronounced effect on the texture over the top. And that's why we use 2, because it will make it slightly darker and soften everything off. So that's it. I've done the apply image. If I go OK. Quickly, I can play around with opacity, but why would you? Especially for this apply image. If I put that down to 50, let's say, it doesn't work for this, but that's what opacity would do, 100. Preserve transparency. If I had transparency on the layer, I would preserve it so it wouldn't go out the bounds of what's already opaque. Mask. Let's say with add or subtract, what happens is everything gets passed via the mask. So if you pick the grey channel, which is the composite grey channel on luminosity, it'll go out via that, not really making much sense. But if you pick red, let's say, it will go out via the luminosity of the red channel. And obviously channels are in grayscale, so whatever bright on that red channel would have the most of the effect coming through. So you're piping everything through this mask. I very rarely use it, but you can do that if you wish. Let's untick it. So I've got what I want. I've got my high frequency separation or frequency separation, whatever you like to call it. Now I go down to a contrast mode, which will make 50% grey transparent. And the contrast mode I'm going to use is linear light. So 50% grey has become transparent now. Anything above 50% grey will be made slightly brighter. Anything that's below 50% grey will be made slightly darker. That's what I mean by contrast mode. There's obviously a lot of math going on, but that's basically what's happening. So how does that differ from the background layer? It doesn't. In fact, if I group them together, shift click on texture, Command or Control G, untick that group, no different. Because with that blur layer, I've done that blur, separated out the high frequency with apply image, and then I'm applying linear light to it, so there's no change. So what you would do now, you would work on this blur layer, for instance, and the quick and dirty method is to use the lasso tool, which I'm on now, and Command 0, so it fits on screen, and go and pick areas and apply Gaussian blur. I wouldn't pick huge areas like this, but for this demonstration, because I just want to show you how it all works, I would use Shift now to add to the selection. So I'll pick huge areas out. I wouldn't normally pick this kind of huge area. I honestly wouldn't, but just for this demonstration, I am. And go around there, around the eye. And then pick the chin, maybe join it up with the other ones. And I wouldn't do it this way normally, but then I would go to Gaussian blur each time I had a certain area, and I use a different blur each time. But for us, Shift X F6 is my keyboard shortcut for Gaussian blur. I'm going to over blur it up to 30, let's say. Go OK. If I did this on the texture layer, the effect would be very, very pronounced. But here on the blur layer, because I'm only blurring what's already been blurred, but I'm blurring it more. Command or Control D to lose the selection. With the group on, let's click that in now. Right, let's zoom in a bit. Command or Control plus. Get rid of that properties panel. That's with the skin smooth. If I turn that off, you should see a subtle difference where all I've done is smoothed out some areas. So it can be really subtle. But that's the quick and dirty method of softening skin. I could put more blur in the first instance of the layer, or I could go much higher with the blur, etc. But that's the quick and dirty way. People don't recommend it, but people still work this way and have that texture separate and just work on that blur layer, let's say, with the clone stamp tool, one of the painting tools, and they would, let's say, use the brush, and you'd be constantly pressing the Alt key to sample the color and be painting around and, you know, softening out the skin. Obviously, that's too much. Command Z, Command Alt or Option Z to lose that change. So that's how some people would work. They go to the texture layer, use the healing tools, etc. This has already been worked on, this image. It's a JPEG I found online, which is you know, royalty free, and you can do what you like with it. But I reckon this is being worked on quite a lot, so I'm not having a massive impact on it. But before we go any further, I'm going to quickly show you something here. I'm going to F12 on this to revert back to the original image, the last save image, which is under File, Revert, which is grayed out, and F12. Right, Command J twice, and I can also use the selection. So if I had a selection on this, marquee it there, go like that. I've just created a quick selection with the marquee tool. If I went to apply image, apply image, I can output everything via that selection. So I can really sort of play around. You could actually use under mask, you can use the selection as well, but it wouldn't work because you'd be working against yourself, because it'll always work via that selection. Of course, you can use an alpha channel to use for the mask as well. So that's how you can use selection as well. Quickly showing you, Command D, quickly showing you the 16-bit method. Let's blur this, Shift F6, I'm not going to hang around too much, that'll do, and then go to layer, copy. So I'm not going to name the layers. The actual method for 16-bit images is shown like this. Add 2 and 0 and an invert, and then you go OK, and then you use linear light to bring it back. So most people only show you the subtract method. Other people say there's add and subtract depending on the bit depth of the image. But I will have a link to my webpage up above and probably down below, and I'll go into a bit more detail about portrait retouching. I don't do a lot, but I know how to do it, but there's different ways of doing it. That method with the lasso is very basic for smoothing the skin quickly. The other method I was talking about was for creating luminosity masks. So Command or Control J to duplicate the layer on this one. Pick hue saturation adjustment layer, will come with a mask. It's already got the mask activated. Image, apply image, multiply, will create a sort of punchy mask in there where the highlights areas will be white and the shadows will be black. So with multiply, you've got the normal luminosity mask, you're just making it stronger in certain areas basically, and making it darker. But it's a bit more complicated than that. But basically, I'll show you by Alt or Option, clicking on it, is the mask now is, if I applied anything, it will mainly only apply to the bright areas, which are the highlight areas. So if I went back here and started playing around with saturation, put the saturation up and pick different colors, disgusting colors, I could put green in the sky, in the highlights. Now, if I wanted to do the same again, there's two or different methods. I could just duplicate this layer and then invert the mask, and then that would be the mask for the shadows. But the normal route would be like this. I'm on the wrong thing there. You would go adjustment layer again, hue saturation, let's say, run apply image, apply image, same settings, except you did invert it. But there you go. I can now work on the shadows because all the shadows are showing up in white. Simple as that. There are better ways of doing luminosity masks, and this is not about luminosity masks, this is about apply image. Obviously, when you're working with multiply and the other blend modes, things become a little bit more complicated, but basically for creating high frequency masks, that method is the recommended method. People say they don't like the high frequency method. Well, basically you don't have to do that lassoing and blurring. You can just use it to play around with the texture because you've got the texture on a separate layer. So if you want to work on the color, let's say, you work on the blur layer, and then you work on the texture, you could work actually on the texture layer. That's it, guys. I will have a link down below. I have covered calculations, link above and down below. Calculations is about channels. Apply image, you can use it on channels, layers, and layer masks, etc. That's it, guys. I hope you got something from this. Thank you very much.